Chapter 2 Searching and Traveling. The village at Parle consisted of about 400 persons, chiefly of the Wahpeton, or Leaf Village Band of the Dakotas. They were very poor and very proud. Stephen R. Riggs, 1880. At first, when Teoyateduta left his village, he had his father and his grandfather's approval. When Wakanyantanka, or Senten Wakanmani, wanted to send a message to a nearby village, they gave Teoyateduta the job. He might take a dugout canoe up the Minnesota River to Shakopee's village, or he might float down the muddy green Mississippi to Lake Pepin and Wabasha's village beyond. Wherever he went, Teoyateduta brought more than just his grandfather or his father's words. He brought news of the fort growing bigger each year on the bluff where the two rivers met. He brought news of the Wasiku and their guns and endless supplies of food. He told about how great boats that belched steam and made their way upriver without a single paddle stroke. More of these steamboats were riding up the Mississippi River each year. While serving as a messenger or while hunting, Teoyateduta traveled throughout his people's lands. His people were the Midewakanton Dakota of the woods around the lower St. Croix, Mississippi, and Minnesota rivers. They were one of 7 groups that made up a great Indian nation, which the Wasiku called the Sioux. Teoyateduta and other eastern members of this nation called themselves Dakota. Their western neighbors called themselves Nakota or Lakota. Along with the Midewakanton, they were the Sissetons, who gathered mainly near Big Stone Lake, many miles west of Kaposia. There were the Wahpetons, who built their lodges closer by along the Minnesota River. Then there were the Wapekuts, who lived near the Blue Earth and Cannon rivers. Teoyateduta probably met Yankton and Yanktonni Nakota while traveling to the James River to trade for buffalo hides. He may not have met any of the even more distant Lakota, the Tetons, who rode their ponies over the Great Plains in what is now North and South Dakota. But he surely heard about them and their great skill in hunting buffalo. While still in his early 20s, Teoyateduta came to know much of the Dakota nation. Wherever he traveled, he was almost certain to find someone who was a distant relative. If he didn't, there was a sure remedy. He could marry into the band. Teoyateduta could have found a bride in the Midewakanton village. As a messenger, Teoyateduta met young women from all of the villages of his band. But in the early 1830s, he went to the Wapekutes, not the Midewakatons, for his bride. And unlike his father, who had brought his wife, Miniodaka Dawin, home to Kaposia, Teoyateduta stayed with the Wapekutes after he married. Certainly, there wasn't much to draw him back to Kaposia. When hunters couldn't find enough muskrats or other animals to pay what they owed, traders started taking back the guns and traps they load to Setawakanmani's people. Without guns and traps, the people had no way to feed themselves. By 1831, they were starving. Teoyateduta's grandfather was desperate. He pleaded with Major Talavera to help them. "It would be better to knock us on the head," Senten Wakanmani told him, "than to starve us to death." During the winter of 1833 and 1834, Senten Wakanmani died. His son, Wakanyantanka, took over as leader of a starving, dwindling village. Willing to try almost anything to save his people, Teoyateduta fathers asked Talavera to help him learn to farm as the Wasiku did, with men and oxen driving a metal plow into the rich, black earth. Only a desperate man would propose such a thing, since the Dakota knew that farming was women's work. Wakanyantanka gave plowing just one try in the spring of 1834, Talibert sent a Wasiku named Samuel Pond to teach the Dakota to farm in the white man's way. Teoyate Duta's father and another man from Kampoja struggled to hold onto the plow. It bucked and swayed so strongly that the two Dakota were, in Pond's words, like men wrestling. He broke out laughing, a response Wakanyantanka did not appreciate. Pond hadn't meant any harm, but Teoyate Duta's father wasn't pleased to be laughed at by a Wasiku in front of his people. Teoyate Duta had no desire to return to a village where the men were reduced to farming. At least on Wapekuta lands, there were still some game to be found. It was a good place for a young man to show his skills as a hunter and a provider. Not long after Teoyate Duta chose his first wife, he married again. Having more than one wife was not uncommon among the Dakota. A good hunter, like Teoyate Duta, could kill more game than just one wife could handle. But Teoyate Duta had more than hunting and marriages on his mind when it came to the Wapekuts. By hunting well, he showed his skill and bravery. By marrying, he gained many new brothers and sisters and cousins. He was forming ties within the village, ties that might someday make him a leader among his adopted people. It was a hope that didn't last. No one knows why, but in the 1830s, Teoyate Duta left the Wapekutes and his two wives and their babies. When a Dakota marriage ended, the village took care of the wives and children. Teoyate Duta and his former wives were free to marry again. Teoyate Duta might have gone back to the Midewakanons, but once again he turned away from his old home. In 1836, smallpox hit many Midewakaton villages. Many died of the disease. The Kampoja people were luckier than most. The doctor at the fort vaccinated many of the villagers, and they survived. But they were still hungry. Talibert was urging Wakanyantanka to sell Dakota land to the United States. In return, he said, the Great Father would give the leader food and money to help his people. Facing all of these challenges, Wakanyantanka turned to his younger sons for help. His oldest son, Teoyate Duta, had left the Wapekutas and moved out west to a place called Parle. The Dakota had named the long, wide place on the Minnesota River Midi Ayadan, the lake that talks. French traders translated the name directly, calling it Parle, and English-speaking people used the French name. The most important man at Parle was a French Dakota named Joseph Renville. Renville was the son of a French voyageur, or traveling trader, and of a Dakota woman. Renville had married a niece of Teoyate Duta's father, so Teoyate Duta was related to Renville and his family. He found it easy to fit into life at Parle. Besides Renville's trading post, there was a village of Wapiton and Sasiton, Dakota, and a sprinkling of wooden houses built by the Wasiku. The whites were missionaries sent by churches in the United States. They hoped to convince the Dakota to abandon traditional ways, to stop hunting and start farming, and to convert to Christianity. They also hoped to teach the Dakota to read and write. In the mid-1830s, Teoyate Duta began attending the Wasiku School. It was just a frame building with a wood stove and rough plank flooring. There was no chalkboard, but missionaries drew large letters on pieces of newspaper and tacked them up around the walls. They created a written alphabet based on the sounds in the Dakota language. Using that alphabet, they taught many Dakota to read and write. It was not difficult, one of the missionaries recalled. A young man has sometimes come in proud and unwilling to be taught, but by sitting there and looking and listening to others, he has started up with the announcement, "I am able." Teoyate Duta was an especially fast learner. He went to school with his relatives Lorenzo Lawrence and Paul Mazgatumani and another grown men. None of them felt awkward learning the alphabet or numbers. In fact, Teoyate Duta felt so much at ease that he soon was counting the Wasiku way. Instead of saying Wancha, Nonpa, Yamni, as he bent his fingers down one by one, he saw in his head the numbers drawn on old newspapers at Parle School. For a time, Teoyate Duta even went to the Parle church. He learned about the white man's savior, Jesus Christ. The missionaries meant well, but they had so many rules. Dakota Christians, even the men, were all supposed to farm the land. Dakota Christian men had to cut their hair short and wear the odd-looking outfits of the whites instead of leggings and blankets. And Dakota Christian men could only have one wife. For Teoyate Duta, becoming a Christian was impossible. Sometime during the summer of 1838, he married the village leader's oldest daughter. She had 3 sisters. As the years passed, Teoyate Duta convinced the leader to give him the other daughters in marriage as well. He felt that marrying sisters was a good choice. They helped each other cook the meat and treat the skins of the game he hunted. As sisters, they were less likely to fight or be jealous of each other. Visitors to his lodge agreed that Teoyate Duta's family was a happy one, and that Teoyate Duta was a devoted husband and father when he was home. Teoyate Duta had made a place for himself at Parle, but he still loved to roam. Sometimes he even traveled to his childhood home, Kaposia. But in 1837, his father and other Midewiwin leaders had signed a treaty with the United States, selling all of their land on the eastern side of the Mississippi River. Wakinyantanka and his people moved their village to the west side of the river. As soon as the Dakota left their bark lodges, white settlers rushed in to claim the land and turn the wood into farms. When Teoyate Duta visited, he could see the smoke rising from their chimneys and the cornstalks drying in their field. Many other things had changed at Kaposia. Teoyate Duta's younger brothers and sisters were no longer the little children he remembered. Some were men and women with families of their own to raise. Another big change was money. Now members of the Kaposia band gathered in the fall to receive their annuity, an annual payment agreed upon in the treaty. Because of the regular annuities, money and supplies from the United States, the Midewiwin no longer had to depend on hunting and trapping for all their needs. Part of their annuity was food, flour, pork, and corn. Teoyate Duta's young nieces and nephews grew fat on a Wasiku diet of meat and bread. His brothers and cousins, all brave men, seemed unsure how to fill their days. In the past, men proved themselves as hunters or warriors. As game grew scarcer and scarcer each year, the men struggled to show they were good hunters. To show their bravery in battle, they wanted to raid Ojibwe camps to the north, but the Indian agent and soldiers at the fort punished the Dakota and Ojibwe when they waged war. With few options left to them, many men at Kaposia turned to drinking. The changes Teoyate Duta saw at Kaposia did not make him want to return. They may, however, have given him an idea of how to earn a living. Teoyate Duta was a good hunter, but even the best hunter would have had difficulty feeding a family year-round from the game near Parle. With all he had learned about Wasiku numbers and the appeal of whiskey, Teoyate Duta was ready to go into business as a trader. Just up the Mississippi from Kaposia, on the east side of the river, was a Wasiku settlement called St. Paul. It was mostly a gathering of crudely built saloons, or grog shops as they were called then. Teoyate Duta bought kegs of whiskey at those shops, loaded them into canoes, and paddled them up the Minnesota River to sell to Sasiton and Wahpeton family and friends. Some whiskey traders sold part of the keg's content along the way, filling it up with water after each stop. Whether they were honest or not, traders brought home huge profits in ponies and buffalo hides and blankets. In the early 1840s, Teo Yateduta did well enough that white traders complained that he was hurting their business. Teo Yateduta couldn't have competed with the Wasiku if he hadn't been cunning. He had mastered numbers well enough that he was able to tell traders just how much he owed them, or how much they owed him. Eventually, he even tried his hand at poker, a Wasiku card game that was all about numbers. Anyone who watched him play a game and clean out the other players was sure to steer clear of him, and anyone who hadn't seen him play poker before was sure to lose his blanket or his shirt. When Teo Yateduta traveled up the Minnesota River, gambled with soldiers at the fort, or brought game to his family at Parle, people noticed him. A fur trader named Henry Sibley never forgot the intelligent and athletic-looking young man he knew in the early 1840s. Teo Yateduta led a winter hunt in 1841 and invited Sibley to come along. Sibley had a horse and easily followed the herd of elk they were tracking. Teo Yateduta effortlessly kept pace as well, running nearly 30 miles each day for almost a week over the winter snows. With such strength and ability, Teo Yateduta seemed ready to become a leader of his people. He was impatient to prove himself, to show others how strong and brave and smart he was.